One of the values, for example, of attending state associations.
Mm-hmm.
I did not attend primarily to hear the preaching or the singing.
Really?
I attended primarily for the attendance at business sessions. I wanted to see how did people in South Carolina manage their business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How did they do it in Michigan? How did they do it in California? Because when we got to the National Association and had a business meeting, all of those people were involved in one business. Now, you need to know, how do you do business in Virginia? Because that will determine how you do business on a national level.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I watched for years that when reports were given, those who were interested in a certain report stayed. But after the board members were elected, they left. They weren't interested in anything else. So what we did is we allowed the departments that were not going to elect to give their reports first.
Mm-hmm. That held the people over.
That came as a result of observing how they did it in states.
I see. Now, kind of as an aside, how are the states different? You know, see, I've only seen North Carolina.
Well, in many states, they are, for example, take the state of Missouri. They run very smoothly, much like the national. It is organized like that. They respect their board. They respect their leadership. There's very little controversy. Now, you come to some states, they're always fussing about an issue. They're big on resolutions. They're big, and you're going to have that at the national.
Right.
Now, some states don't have business at all. Their business is just an afterthought. It's more of a rally.
Singing and sermons.
Singing and sermons.
Getting together.
And yet many of the states, as I observed them, the business basically is the same. I found it was true in most state associations. They trusted their boards to make the decisions. And over a period of years, that has changed on a national level. You do not hear near as much controversy over reports as there used to be. And even if there is controversy, it is restrained.
It's not like it was in the past.
Yes, well, part of that is we've grown up. We were a very young denomination, and young people have a tendency to be more impatient, more dogmatic. They do not see the whole picture. But as our men have matured, there's a degree of acceptance that was not true years ago.
I wanted to go back to something you mentioned earlier, like the leadership. You know, administration was lower on the survey for the dissertation and so forth. And it looks like our guys don't value that, perhaps, or at least when that survey was done.
Well, I think the issue is that leadership has to be aware of that which it is leading. I heard of Dr. Jackie Simpson make the observation that until you have sit among people, until you understand them, you cannot lead them. One reason leadership has not been emphasized much in our movement. We will not tolerate leadership to a degree. Anybody that rises up with leadership, we pick him apart, not realizing that somebody has to lead. Somebody has to make a decision. For example, in our denomination, we do not have a place for an authoritative leader. The top person would be the executive secretary, and what he does is he really administrates and carries out the day-to-day operation of the denomination. The moderator has no authority. Now, what I'm saying is that in an autocratic system, leadership looks different than it does. Leadership in our denomination is more of influence, because you have leaders at every level. In the district, there are leaders. And I've said to young people, for example, young preachers, what you need to do if you want to be used in our movement is go to the quarterly meeting and observe who is leading. Make friends with them. Encourage them. They then, in turn, may elect you to a position. Now, If you don't recognize, one of the dangers of being an executive secretary in our movement is that you're dealing with your peers. When you deal with leaders, you deal with them somewhat different than you do somebody that doesn't have a choice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my concept of leadership is that you influence. You motivate, but you don't intimidate.
Mm-hmm.
You try to bring them to the place that they say, this is what we want to do. Basically, it's what Margaret Thatcher did in England. She led by consensus.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is hard to do because people are not patient enough to come to consensus. For example, if a man wants to do something in his church, let's just use the church for example, and he has a 5-4 vote on his deacon board, he's very, very foolish to do, even if the majority says do, until it can come to consensus and bring the others on board. This is one reason when we restated all of our charters, we talk about something that changes that charter one year, we vote on it next year, for example, with the Bible College.
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be opposition? Is anybody going to say anything? Let's hear.
Mm-hmm.
And then, after you can come to consensus, you make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
But we have not emphasized leadership. We have been sort of anti-counseling in our movement. And we know very little about administration. We don't even support administration. And the reason is our people do not understand that the pastor is an administrator as well as a preacher and teacher.
You have ideas about how to change that?
Just quietly keep talking about the value of organization. The reason the human body functions the way it functions is it has structure.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I hear, for example, if you just had the flesh and no skeleton, it's like jelly.
Mm-hmm.
The denomination can only function properly if all the elements, the circles, I believe we're organized with the most important person is the individual Christian. He joins a local church, that's a bigger circle. The local church joins a district, that's a wider circle. The district joins a state, that's even a wider circle, and the state joins the national, which is a wide circle, and then the international fellowship is a worldwide circle.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, is the way the book of Acts is organized. Now, when we talk about encouraging preachers, we have the structure. We do not use it.
Mm-hmm.
We have the quarterly meeting. I mean, when you come to the minister's retreat and you encourage us, much of that can be done at the quarterly meeting.
Yeah.
Who cares about preachers? They ought to care about one another.
Right. So maybe doing something more on those lines.
I'm saying we have not utilized the structure properly. Somebody asked me at the National this year, for example, what does the General Board do? Well, I said the General Board was not the original board. They had an executive board. They created the General Board to give equal representation from every entity that held membership in the National Association. You can't stack it. It is equal, it is fair. It ought to be, and it is the board that reviews all business and recommends the adoption of all budgets. If it were used properly, it would be the vision casting element of the denomination, not one department, not one executive secretary, but the general board that brings together all the individuals that characterize who we are. It's never been used properly. That's where leadership training ought to be done.
Try to get them.
That's where motivation needs to be done. And then they need to carry it back to their states, and the states need to carry it. For example, we in Georgia set up a standardized ministerial exam that now here's how we did it. The state selected all the ordaining council chairmen, 8 associations, charged them with that responsibility. They came back to the state with a plan, with an exam. We then sent it back to the quarterly meetings. and the quarterly meetings adopted it. If you adopted that when you transferred from one association to another, no problem. Two associations did not. So when that ministers would want to transfer into one of the six, they were examined again. And there was and I won't mention it here, but there was a special issue that they were weak on. So I'm saying, we are of the nature that you can pass what you want to at the national. Ultimately, the decision has to be made by the individual. Now that's both weak and that's strong. But I really believe that congregational government is messy, but it is a biblical government, and I think that's, if you can get everybody on board and they own it,